Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carefully loaded another shell into the ammunition bay of the USS Enterprise. The massive aircraft carrier cut through the Pacific waters, its deck bustling with activity as fighter jets prepared for another mission. At 23 years old, Maria had been working as an ammunition specialist for 8 months, but today felt different somehow. The morning sun blazed overhead as she worked alongside her crew, moving the heavy shells with practiced efficiency. Her Navy uniform was already damp with perspiration, but she never complained. This job meant everything to her. It was her chance to serve her country and prove that she belonged here among the brave men and women of the United States Navy. As Maria bent down to lift another crate, something slipped from beneath her uniform shirt. A small, worn medal on a thin chain had worked its way out from where she kept it hidden. She quickly tucked it back inside, glancing around nervously to see if anyone had noticed. The medal was her most precious possession, but also her deepest secret. "Santos, pick up the pace," shouted Chief Petty Officer Johnson from across the deck. "We've got birds launching in 30 minutes. "Yes, sir," Maria called back, redoubling her efforts. She had learned early in her naval career to keep her head down and work hard. Being one of the few women in her unit already made her stand out enough. She didn't need any additional attention. The medal bounced gently against her chest as she worked, a constant reminder of why she was really here. It wasn't just about serving her country, though that was important to her. This medal connected her to a past that very few people knew about, a story that could change everything if the wrong person discovered it. Admiral William Hayes stood on the bridge, reviewing the day's flight operations. At 58 years old, he had seen more action than most sailors could imagine. His weathered face bore the marks of decades at sea, and his sharp gray eyes missed nothing. He had earned his rank through courage, dedication, and an uncanny ability to notice details that others overlooked. As he scanned the deck below through his binoculars, something caught his attention. A young woman working in the ammunition bay seemed to be concealing something. He watched as she quickly tucked what appeared to be a small object back inside her uniform. His instincts, honed by years of military service, told him this was worth investigating. "Lieutenant Morrison," he called to his aide, "I want you to pull the personnel file on that ammunition specialist down there, the young woman with the dark hair." "Sir, which one specifically?" "The one who just hid something in her shirt. Find out everything about her." Admiral Hayes had seen enough secrets in his career to know when someone was carrying a burden. The way the young sailor moved, the nervous glance she cast around the deck, the careful way she concealed whatever she was hiding, it all spoke of someone with something significant to protect. Maria continued her work, unaware that she was now under scrutiny from the ship's commanding officer. She had become an expert at hiding her secret over the years. The medal had been with her through high school, through basic training, and now through her deployment on one of the Navy's most important vessels. Her grandfather had given it to her just before he passed away 3 years ago. "Mija," he had whispered to her in his hospital bed, pressing the worn medal into her palm. "This belongs to you now, but you must be careful who you tell about it. Some stories are too dangerous to share." At the time, Maria hadn't fully understood what he meant. Her grandfather had always been mysterious about his past, speaking in riddles about things that happened long ago and far away. But as she grew older and began to piece together fragments of his stories, she started to realize that this simple medal might be connected to something much larger than she had ever imagined. The afternoon grew hotter as the crew continued loading ammunition for the next wave of flight operations. Maria's unit was responsible for ensuring that every fighter jet had the firepower it needed to complete its mission. It was dangerous work. One mistake could cost lives, but she approached it with the same dedication her grandfather had taught her to bring to everything she did. "You know, Santos," said her bunkmate, Petty Officer Second Class Rebecca Kim, as they worked side by side, "you've been here 8 months and I still don't know anything about your family. You're like a mystery woman or something." Maria smiled, but kept working. "Not much to tell, really, just me and my mom back in San Diego." "What about your dad? Grandparents? You never talk about anyone else?" "My grandfather passed away a few years ago," Maria said quietly. "He raised me after my dad left. He was a good man." Rebecca sensed there was more to the story, but she knew better than to push. Everyone on the ship had their reasons for being here, and sometimes those reasons were best kept private. As the day wore on, Admiral Hayes received the personnel file he had requested. Maria Elena Santos, age 23, born in San Diego, California. Parents: Elena Santos, mother, and unknown father. Raised primarily by maternal grandfather Miguel Santos, deceased. Excellent service record, no disciplinary actions, commendations, for accuracy and dedication, but it was the next line that made the Admiral pause. Under emergency contact information, Maria had listed only her mother, but there was a note in her original enlistment papers that mentioned her grandfather's full name: Miguel Roberto Santos, former resident of Argentina, naturalized U.S. citizen in 1952. Admiral Hayes had been in the Navy long enough to recognize the significance of certain dates and places. Argentina in 1952 was a very different world than it was now. People who had fled to South America around that time often had compelling reasons for leaving their original homes behind. As evening approached and the flight operations concluded, Maria finally allowed herself a moment of rest. She sat on her bunk in the crew quarters, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the hidden metal through her shirt. She wondered what her grandfather would think if he could see her now, serving on one of America's greatest warships. She had no idea that her secret was about to be discovered by someone who might finally understand the true significance of what she carried. The metal that had remained hidden for so long was about to change not just her life, but the lives of many others who had been waiting decades for answers to questions they thought would never be resolved. Admiral Hayes spent the evening in his private quarters, studying Maria Santos's file with the intensity he usually reserved for battle plans. Something about her background didn't add up, and his decades of experience had taught him to trust his instincts when details seemed out of place. He reached for his secure satellite phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in over 2 years. The voice that answered was crisp and professional. Naval Intelligence Commander Phillips speaking. "Phillips, this is Admiral Hayes on the Enterprise. I need you to run a deep background check on someone for me. Not the standard personnel review. I need the full historical workup." "Of course, sir. What's the name?" "Miguel Roberto Santos, naturalized citizen 1952, originally from Argentina, and his granddaughter Maria Elena Santos, currently serving on my ship." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, that's going back quite a ways. May I ask what's prompted this request?" Admiral Hayes looked out his porthole at the vast Pacific Ocean. "Just a feeling, Commander. But in my experience, feelings like this usually mean something important." The next morning, Maria arrived at her duty station early as always. She believed in being prepared, another lesson her grandfather had taught her. "Mija," he used to say, "success comes to those who are ready when opportunity arrives." As she began organizing the ammunition supplies, she noticed Admiral Hayes walking the deck with his aide. It wasn't unusual for the commanding officer to inspect operations, but something about the way his gaze lingered on her workstation made her nervous. "Attention on deck!" someone shouted as the Admiral approached their area. Maria and her crew snapped to attention, saluting smartly. Admiral Hayes returned the salute, then surprised everyone by addressing Maria directly. "Petty Officer Santos, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Maria responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been reviewing the crew efficiency reports. Your work here has been exemplary. Where did you learn to handle ordnance with such precision?" Maria felt her heart racing. "My grandfather taught me about mechanical systems, sir. He was very skilled with his hands." "Is that so? And what did your grandfather do for a living?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Maria sensed there was more behind it. "He was a watchmaker, sir. He said that precise work required patience and respect for every small part." Admiral Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "Wise man. What was his name?" "Miguel Santos, sir. And he was from Argentina originally?" Now Maria was certain this wasn't a casual conversation. "Yes, sir. He came to America when he was young." "Well, carry on, Santos. Keep up the excellent work." As the Admiral moved away, Maria's bunkmate Rebecca whispered, "That was weird." Why would he care about your grandfather? Maria shrugged, but her mind was racing. She touched the hidden metal through her shirt, wondering if somehow her secret was starting to unravel. Later that afternoon, Admiral Hayes received a call from Commander Phillips. "Sir, you were right to trust your instincts. Miguel Roberto Santos is a very interesting case." "Go on." "He entered the United States in 1951, not 1952 as listed in some records. He came through a refugee assistance program that was helping people escape from Europe via South America. According to our files, he was originally from Austria." Admiral Hayes felt his pulse quicken. "Austria? What else do you have?" "This is where it gets complicated, sir. The records from that time period are incomplete, but what we do have suggests that Miguel Santos wasn't his original name. There are indications he was involved in some kind of resistance activity during World War II. "What kind of resistance activity?" "Unknown, sir. But here's the interesting part. There's a note in his file from 1967. Someone from the Austrian government made an inquiry about him. They were looking for witnesses to war crimes trials." Admiral Hayes set down his coffee cup. "Did they find what they were looking for?" "No, sir. Miguel Santos had died in 1965 according to their information, but we now know that was incorrect. He lived until 2021. It appears he may have deliberately kept a low profile. Commander, I need you to dig deeper. I want to know everything about this man's background, and I want to know what the Austrian government was looking for." "Sir, may I ask what's prompted this investigation? Has something happened with his granddaughter?" Admiral Hayes paused. "She's hiding something, Phillips. Something she wears around her neck. And given what you've just told me, I have a feeling that whatever she's hiding might be very important." Meanwhile, Maria was finding it increasingly difficult to concentrate on her work. The Admiral's questions had stirred up memories and fears she had tried to keep buried. That evening, she sat alone in the ship's chapel, holding the medal in her hands for the first time in months. It was a simple piece, tarnished with age. On one side was an image she had never been able to fully identify. It looked like a mountain peak with some kind of building beneath it. On the other side were words in a language she didn't recognize and a date, 1943. Her grandfather had never explained what the medal meant, only that it was proof of something important, and that someday someone might need to see it. He had made her promise to keep it safe, but also to be ready to share it if the right person ever asked. "How will I know who the right person is, abuelo?" she had asked him. "You'll know, mija. When the time comes, you'll know." As she sat in the quiet chapel, Maria wondered if that time was approaching. The Admiral's interest in her background seemed too specific to be coincidental. But was he the right person her grandfather had spoken about, or was he someone who might cause trouble for her family? The next morning brought news that changed everything. Commander Phillips called Admiral Hayes with an update that made the situation much more urgent. "Sir, I've made contact with the Austrian War Crimes Documentation Center. They're very interested in Miguel Santos." "Why?" "According to their records, there was a man by that name who helped smuggle Jewish families out of Austria in 1943. He was part of an underground network that operated in the Alps near Salzburg." Admiral Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. "And they lost track of him after the war." "Exactly. The network was betrayed in late 1943. Most of the members were captured and executed, but a few managed to escape. Miguel Santos was one of them. The Austrian government has been trying to locate survivors for decades." "Why?" "They want to honor them, sir. There's been a movement to recognize the brave civilians who risked their lives to save others during the war. Miguel Santos and his network saved an estimated 300 people." Admiral Hayes realized he was dealing with something much bigger than a sailor with a secret. If Maria Santos was carrying evidence of her grandfather's wartime heroism, it could rewrite history books and provide closure for dozens of families who had been searching for answers for decades. But first, he had to convince her to trust him with the truth. Admiral Hayes knew he had to approach the situation carefully. Maria Santos clearly didn't trust easily, and given what he had learned about her grandfather's past, he understood why. People who had lived through the war often passed down a deep caution about sharing secrets with authority figures. He decided to meet with her privately, away from the curious eyes of her fellow sailors. That afternoon, he sent word through Chief Petty Officer Johnson that Petty Officer Santos should report to his quarters at 1900 hours. Maria's hands shook slightly as she knocked on the Admiral's door. Being called to the commanding officer's private quarters was never routine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to his questions about her grandfather. "Enter," came the Admiral's voice from inside. Maria stepped into the spacious cabin, noting the maps on the walls, the model ships on the shelves, and the photographs of the Admiral with various dignitaries and military officials. Admiral Hayes gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Please sit down, Santos, and relax. You're not in any trouble." Despite his reassuring words, Maria remained tense. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Admiral Hayes studied her face for a moment before speaking. "I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you're mature enough to handle the truth. I've been investigating your grandfather's background." Maria felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sir? Miguel Santos was not just a watchmaker, was he?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria had rehearsed this moment in her mind many times, but now that it was actually happening, she found herself unsure of what to say. "I don't know what you mean, sir." Admiral Hayes leaned forward. "Santos, I've been in the Navy for 35 years. I've served in conflicts around the world, and I've learned to recognize when someone is carrying the weight of important secrets. You have something that doesn't belong hidden away, don't you?" Maria's hand moved instinctively to her chest, where the metal lay concealed beneath her uniform. The gesture didn't escape Admiral Hayes's notice. "Whatever it is you're hiding, it's connected to your grandfather's time in Austria, isn't it?" The mention of Austria made Maria's eyes widen. She had never told anyone about Austria. Her grandfather had mentioned it only once, late at night when he thought she was sleeping. "How do you know about Austria?" she whispered. "Because, Santos, your grandfather was a hero, and I believe you're carrying proof of that heroism." Admiral Hayes stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the ocean. "Let me tell you what I've learned. In 1943, there was an underground network operating in the Austrian Alps. They helped Jewish families escape from Nazi-occupied territory. The network was led by a group of local civilians who risked everything to save innocent lives." Maria listened, her heart pounding. One of those civilians was named Miguel Santos. He and his team saved approximately 300 people before their network was betrayed. Most of the team was captured and executed, but Miguel managed to escape. He eventually made his way to South America, and from there to the United States. The Admiral turned back to face Maria. "The Austrian government has been searching for survivors of that network for decades. They want to honor their heroism and provide closure to the families who were saved." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes. Her grandfather had never told her the full story, but she had always sensed that his past contained something both terrible and wonderful. "What does this have to do with me, sir?" "Because I believe your grandfather gave you something before he died. Something that could prove his involvement in the resistance network. And I think you've been carrying it with you, afraid to let anyone see it." Maria's resolve finally cracked. She reached beneath her uniform shirt and pulled out the thin chain, revealing the worn metal that had been her secret for so long. Admiral Hayes's breath caught as he saw it. Even from across the room he could see that it was old and significant. "May I see it?" he asked gently. With trembling hands, Maria removed the chain and placed the metal on his desk. Admiral Hayes picked it up carefully, examining both sides, with the respect of someone who understood its importance. "My God," he whispered. "Santos, do you know what this is?" "My grandfather said it was proof of something important, but he never explained what." Admiral Hayes turned the metal over his hands noting the mountain peak design and the foreign words. "This appears to be some kind of identification medal for resistance fighters. The mountain looks like it could be in the Austrian Alps." He looked up at Maria. "This could be exactly what historians have been looking for. Physical proof of the resistance network's existence." Maria wiped her eyes. "Sir, my grandfather made me promise to keep it safe. He said that someday the right person would need to see it. But he also warned me that sharing it could be dangerous. He was right. To be cautious, Admiral Hayes said. During the Cold War, there were still people who might have wanted to silence witnesses to what happened during the war. But times have changed, Santos. Now this medal could help complete the historical record and bring honor to your grandfather's memory. Maria looked uncertain. What happens if I let you report this? First, we would have experts authenticate the medal. If it proves to be genuine, it would become part of the historical record of the resistance movement. Your grandfather would finally receive the recognition he deserved. And what about me? Admiral Hayes smiled. You, Santos, would be known as the granddaughter of a war hero, and you would have helped solve a mystery that historians have been working on for decades. Maria sat quietly for several minutes, considering everything she had heard. Finally, she looked up at the Admiral. Sir, there's more. My grandfather didn't just give me this medal. He told me stories, names, places, details about the people they saved. He made me memorize them in case the medal was ever lost. Admiral Hayes felt his pulse quicken. You remember the stories? Every word, sir. He said that someday someone might need to know exactly what happened in those mountains. The Admiral realized he was dealing with something even more significant than he had imagined. Maria Santos wasn't just carrying a piece of metal. She was carrying living history, preserved in her memory by a grandfather who had known that someday the truth would need to be told. Santos, I want you to know that whatever you decide, your service record will not be affected. This is your choice to make. Maria picked up the medal and held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight. For years, it had been a burden, a secret that separated her from everyone around her. Now, for the first time, it felt like it might become something else entirely, a bridge to a past that could finally be acknowledged and honored. Sir, what do I need to do? Admiral Hayes wasted no time in setting the wheels in motion. Within hours of his conversation with Maria, he had arranged for a secure video conference with the Austrian War Crimes Documentation Center, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and several historians who specialized in wartime resistance movements. Maria found herself sitting in the Admiral's conference room, the medal placed carefully on the table before her, as experts from around the world examined it through high-definition cameras. Dr. Elena Hoffman from the Documentation Center leaned forward on the screen, her excitement barely contained. The markings are consistent with what we know about the Alpine resistance networks, Dr. Hoffman said in accented English. The mountain depicted appears to be the Untersberg, which overlooks Salzburg. That was indeed where Miguel Santos's network operated. Dr. James Morrison from the Holocaust Memorial Museum adjusted his glasses as he studied the images. The date of 1943 is particularly significant. That's when the network's activities reached their peak, just before they were betrayed. Maria listened to the experts discuss her grandfather's medal as if it were a historical artifact, which she supposed it was. But to her, it was still the warm piece of metal that had rested against her heart for years, carrying with it the weight of untold stories. Miss Santos, Dr. Hoffman addressed her directly. Admiral Hayes mentioned that your grandfather shared specific stories with you about his activities. Would you be comfortable sharing those with us? Maria looked at Admiral Hayes, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and began to speak. My grandfather told me about the winter of 1943. He said it was the coldest winter he could remember, but they couldn't let the weather stop them because people were depending on them. As Maria continued, the experts listened with growing amazement. She recounted details that had never appeared in any historical record. The names of safe houses, the routes used to guide families through the mountains, the code words that resistance members used to identify each other. He told me about a family called the Webbers, Maria continued. They had twin daughters, maybe 8 years old, who were so scared they wouldn't stop crying. My grandfather carried one of them on his back for 12 miles through a snowstorm to get them to safety. Dr. Hoffman gasped. The Weber family. We've been trying to trace what happened to them for 15 years. Their descendants in New York have been searching for information about how their grandparents escaped Austria. There are more stories, Maria said quietly. Many more. Over the next 2 hours, Maria shared everything her grandfather had told her. She spoke of midnight journeys through mountain passes, of close calls with German patrols, of the heartbreak when trusted allies were captured and executed. She recounted names, dates, and locations with a precision that amazed the historians. Your grandfather was remarkable, Dr. Morrison said when she finished, not only for his courage but for his foresight in preserving these stories. Without your testimony, dozens of family histories would have remained incomplete. Admiral Hayes had remained mostly silent during the debriefing, but now he spoke up. What's the next step, doctors? Dr. Hoffman looked at her colleagues before responding. We'll need to verify as much of this information as possible through our archives, but based on what we've heard today, I'm confident that Miguel Santos was indeed a key figure in the Alpine Resistance Network. There's something else, Dr. Morrison added. The Austrian government has been planning a memorial ceremony to honor the resistance fighters. This information could not only confirm your grandfather's heroism, but it could also provide closure for many families who have been searching for answers for decades. After the conference ended, Maria sat alone with Admiral Hayes in his quarters. The medal was back around her neck, but somehow it felt different now. Lighter, as if sharing its secrets had lifted a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. How do you feel? Admiral Hayes asked. Confused, sir. Proud. Scared. My grandfather always seemed like just my grandfather, you know? It's hard to think of him as a war hero. The best heroes are often the ones who don't see themselves that way, Admiral Hayes replied. They just do what needs to be done. Maria nodded, then looked up at him with curiosity. Sir, can I ask you something? Why did you pursue this? You could have just ignored what you saw. Admiral Hayes was quiet for a moment, then walked to his desk and picked up a framed photograph. In it, a young soldier stood next to an elderly man in civilian clothes. This is my grandfather, he said. He served in World War II, in the Pacific. He never talked much about the war, but I always sensed there were stories he carried that he never shared. He set the photo down and looked at Maria. When I saw you hiding that medal, I recognized something in your behavior. The careful way. You protected it, the weight you seemed to carry. It reminded me of my grandfather. I realized that some stories are too important to stay buried. 3 days later, Dr. Hoffman called with news that changed everything. The Austrian archives had confirmed multiple details from Maria's testimony. The Weber family had indeed been real, and their descendants in New York were eager to meet the granddaughter of the man who had saved their grandparents. More importantly, the Austrian government wanted to posthumously award Miguel Santos the Medal of Honor for Civil Courage, the country's highest civilian award for wartime heroism. There's going to be a ceremony in Salzburg next month, Dr. Hoffman explained during another video call. We would very much like you to attend, Miss Santos, to accept the medal on your grandfather's behalf. Maria looked at Admiral Hayes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Sir, I don't know if I can get leave. Admiral Hayes smiled. Santos, I think the Navy can spare you for a week. In fact, I'd consider it an honor to recommend you for this trip. That evening, Maria called her mother from the ship's communication center. Elena Santos had known even less about her father's past than Maria had, and the news left her speechless. Mija, your grandfather would be so proud, her mother finally said through tears. He always said that the truth has a way of coming out when the time is right. As Maria hung up the phone, she thought about how much her life had changed in just a few days. She was still the same ammunition specialist loading shells on an aircraft carrier, but now she was also the keeper of a family legacy that had touched hundreds of lives. The medal around her neck no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like a bridge, connecting her to a past she was only beginning to understand, and to a future where her grandfather's heroism would finally be recognized. But she had no idea that the greatest revelation was still to come. The ancient city of Salzburg looked like something from a fairy tale as Maria stepped off the plane. Snow-capped mountains surrounded the medieval buildings, and church bells echoed through the crisp autumn air. She had never imagined that her Grandfather's stories would bring her to this beautiful place that had witnessed so much history. Dr. Hoffman met her at the airport, along with a small delegation from the Austrian government. As they drove through the city center, Maria pressed her face to the window, trying to imagine her grandfather as a young man walking these same streets, carrying out dangerous missions to save innocent lives. Tomorrow's ceremony will be held at the Salzburg residence, Dr. Hoffman explained. It's where the Prince Archbishops once lived. We thought it would be appropriate to honor your grandfather in a place that represents the Austria he helped protect. That evening, Maria attended a dinner where she met some of the most remarkable people she had ever encountered. There were descendants of families her grandfather had saved, historians who had spent decades researching the resistance networks, and even two other elderly men who claimed to have worked with Miguel Santos during the war. Your grandfather saved my grandmother and her 3 children, said Rachel Weber Goldman, a woman about Maria's mother's age. My grandmother used to tell us stories about the brave man who carried my Aunt Sarah through a blizzard. She never knew his name, only that he had kind eyes and strong hands. Another woman, Elizabeth Brenner, approached Maria with tears in her eyes. My father was just 16 when your grandfather helped him escape. He went on to become a doctor in America and saved thousands of lives during his career. Your grandfather's courage created ripples that touched so many people. As the evening progressed, Maria realized that her grandfather's actions had created an entire network of descendants, people who existed because he had risked his life for their ancestors. She was overwhelmed by the magnitude of his impact. But the most surprising encounter came when an elderly man named Klaus Fischer approached her near the end of the dinner. "Miss Santos," he said in heavily accented English, "I must speak with you privately. I have something that belonged to your grandfather." Intrigued, Maria followed him to a quiet corner of the room. Klaus reached into his jacket and pulled out an object wrapped in cloth. "I have carried this for 78 years, he said, carefully unwrapping what appeared to be another medal, almost identical to the one Maria wore around her neck. "During our last mission together, your grandfather gave this to me. He said that if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe and someday find his family. He told me there was another one just like it, and that together they would tell the complete story." Maria's hands trembled as she examined the second medal. It was indeed nearly identical to hers, but there were slight differences in the markings. "Klaus," she whispered. "What complete story?" The old man's eyes grew distant. "Your grandfather was not just a member of the resistance network, Miss Santos. He was its leader. But more than that, he was the one who designed the entire escape route system that saved so many lives." Maria felt the room spinning around her. "I don't understand." "Your grandfather was a brilliant man. Before the war, he studied engineering and cartography. When the Nazis occupied Austria, he used his knowledge to create a system of hidden routes through the mountains, routes that could be used even in the worst weather, even when German patrols were searching for escapees." Klaus continued, his voice growing stronger as he remembered. "These medals were not just identification for resistance members. They were keys to a map. Each medal contains markings that, when combined with the others, show the complete network of safe routes through the Alps." Maria looked down at the 2 medals, seeing them with new understanding. The mountain peaks, the strange symbols she had never been able to interpret, they weren't decorative. They were functional. "How many medals were there originally?" she asked. 5, Klaus replied. "Your grandfather kept one, I had one, and 3 others were carried by resistance leaders in different sectors. When our network was betrayed, your grandfather managed to collect 2 of the medals before he escaped. He kept one and gave me the other for safekeeping." Maria's mind raced. "What happened to the other 3? "Lost, we assumed. Hidden or destroyed, when their carriers were captured." The next day, the ceremony at the Salzburg residence was more emotional than Maria had anticipated. The Great Hall was filled with dignitaries, historians, and families whose ancestors had been saved by the resistance network. When the Austrian Minister of the Interior called her name, Maria walked forward on unsteady legs to accept her grandfather's posthumous Medal of Honor for civil courage. "Miguel Santos," the minister announced to the assembled crowd. exemplified the highest ideals of human courage and compassion. At great personal risk, he organized and led a network that saved hundreds of innocent lives during one of history's darkest periods. As Maria accepted the medal, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that seemed almost too precious to touch, she thought about the simple, tarnished medal hidden beneath her dress. Her grandfather's real medal, the one that had started this incredible journey. During the reception that followed, Dr. Morrison from the Holocaust Memorial Museum approached her with exciting news. "Maria, I've been in contact with collectors and museums around the world. We may have located one of the missing medals from your grandfather's network." Maria's heart jumped. "Where?" The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum acquired a collection of wartime artifacts from an estate sale 3 years ago. Among the items was a medal that matches the description Klaus provided. "We never knew what it was, but now, can you get it? We're arranging to have it examined. If it's authentic, it would become part of a permanent exhibit about the Alpine resistance networks. Your grandfather's story would be preserved for future generations." That evening, as Maria walked through the historic streets of Salzburg with Klaus, she tried to process everything that had happened. In just a few weeks, she had gone from being a sailor with a family secret to being the key witness in a major historical discovery. "Klaus," she said as they paused beside the Salzach River, "why do you think my grandfather chose to keep this secret for so long?" The old man was quiet for several minutes, watching the water flow past. Finally, he spoke. "Your grandfather was a careful man, Maria. After the war, there were still dangers for people like us. Some of the Nazis who had hunted us escaped justice and lived quietly in South America. Others became informants for various governments during the Cold War." Klaus turned to face her. "But I think there was another reason he stayed silent. Guilt." "Guilt? Why would he feel guilty?" "He saved lives. Because he survived when so many others didn't. Because he escaped when his friends were captured and killed. Survivor's guilt is very real, Maria. Many resistance fighters struggled with it for decades." Maria nodded, beginning to understand. Her grandfather's occasional moments of sadness, the way he would stare out the window sometimes as if seeing something far away. It all made sense now. He also knew, Klaus continued, that the moment he spoke publicly about his past, his quiet life would end. He would become a historical figure, subject to interviews, investigations, and attention. I think he preferred to live peacefully with his memories. "But he made sure the story would survive," Maria said, touching the medal beneath her dress. "Exactly. He chose you as the keeper of his legacy because he trusted that when the time was right, you would know what to do." As they walked back toward her hotel, Klaus made one final revelation that took Maria's breath away. "Maria, there's something else you should know. Your grandfather wasn't the only one who made it to America. There were 3 other survivors from our network who eventually settled in different parts of the United States. They've been living quiet lives just as your grandfather did." "Are they still alive?" "2 of them are. They're both in their 90s now, but they're still sharp. When word spreads about this ceremony and what you've discovered, I believe they'll come forward. Your grandfather's decision to reveal his story through you may inspire them to share their own memories." That night, Maria sat in her hotel room, overlooking the city of Salzburg, holding both medals in her hands. The weight of history felt enormous but no longer frightening. She was beginning to understand that she wasn't just carrying her grandfather's secret. She was carrying the stories of hundreds of people who had been saved, and the memories of dozens of heroes who had risked everything for strangers. She thought about Admiral Hayes back on the USS Enterprise, probably wondering how her trip was going. She thought about her mother in San Diego, eagerly waiting to hear about the ceremony. And she thought about her grandfather, who had somehow known that this moment would come. As she prepared for bed, Maria made a decision. When she returned to the carrier, she would request permission to write a detailed report of everything she had learned. Not just for the historical record, but for her family, for the descendants of the people her grandfather had saved, and for future generations who needed to know that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary courage. The next morning brought a phone call that would change everything once again. Dr. Hoffman's voice was excited but serious. "Maria, we've heard from the other two survivors Klaus mentioned. They want to meet with you before you return to your ship, and they're bringing something with them that I think will amaze you." "What is it?" "They've been keeping detailed records all these years. Names, dates, routes, photographs. Everything your grandfather's network accomplished. They've been waiting for the right moment to share it, and your courage in coming forward has given them that moment." Maria realized that her grandfather's story was just the beginning. What she had uncovered in Salzburg was not just one man's heroism, but the first thread of a tapestry that would reveal the full scope of one of World War II's most remarkable rescue operations. In 3 days, she would meet the last living witnesses to her grandfather's heroism. And in their memories, she would discover secrets that would complete the picture of who Miguel Santos really was, and why his legacy was even more important than she had ever imagined. The meeting took place in a small cafe in Vienna, 3 days after the ceremony in Salzburg. Maria arrived early, nervous about meeting the last living members of her grandfather's resistance network. She had no idea what to expect from these elderly survivors who had carried their secrets for nearly 8 decades. The first to arrive was Anna Hoffman, a tiny woman of 93 who moved with surprising energy. Despite her age, her eyes were bright and alert, and she embraced Maria as if she were greeting a long-lost granddaughter. "You look just like him," Anna said in heavily accented English. Miguel had those same determined eyes. The second survivor, Thomas Weber, arrived a few minutes later. At 91, he walked with a cane but carried himself with obvious dignity. When he saw Maria, he stopped in his tracks. "My God," he whispered. "It's like seeing Miguel as a young person again." The three of them sat together at a corner table, and Maria felt as if she were sitting with living legends. These were people who had witnessed history, who had made history, and who had kept their incredible stories secret for most of their lives. Anna reached into a worn leather satchel and pulled out a thick bundle of papers wrapped in cloth. "We have been waiting 78 years to share this," she said solemnly. As she unwrapped the bundle, Maria saw dozens of photographs, handwritten notes, maps, and documents that looked like they belonged in a museum. Thomas added his own collection to the table. More photographs, a detailed journal, and what appeared to be official correspondence. "Your grandfather was meticulous," Thomas explained. "He documented everything, not just for historical purposes, but because he knew that someday, people would need proof of what we accomplished." Anna spread out a hand-drawn map that took Maria's breath away. It showed the entire Alpine region with incredible detail, marking safe houses, escape routes, guard posts, and danger zones. Every path, every hiding place, every contact was carefully noted in her grandfather's handwriting. "This is the master map," Anna said. "Your grandfather created this over 2 years of operations. It shows how we moved more than 300 people to safety." But it was the photographs that brought tears to Maria's eyes. Picture after picture showed groups of families, men, women, and children, standing in the snow outside mountain chalets. They looked tired and frightened, but also hopeful. And in many of the photos, she could see a younger version of her grandfather, always in the background, always watching over the people he was helping to save. "He never wanted to be in the center of the photographs," Thomas noted. "He said the pictures should be about the people we saved, not about us." One photograph in particular caught Maria's attention. It showed her grandfather with a young boy, maybe 10 years old, who was holding the hand of an even younger girl. The boy was looking up at Miguel with obvious trust and affection. "That's Samuel Brenner and his sister Rachel," Anna explained. "They were among the last children we rescued before the network was betrayed. Samuel grew up to become a famous violinist. Rachel became a pediatrician. Both of them have children and grandchildren living in America today." Thomas pulled out his journal and opened it to a page near the back. "Your grandfather asked me to write down the names of every person we helped, along with any information we had about their families. He said that someday people might want to trace their family histories." Maria looked at the list, which went on for pages. Hundreds of names with notes about ages, origins, and destinations. It was a complete record of lives saved, families preserved, and futures made possible. "There's something else," Anna said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "something we've never told anyone, not even the historians who interviewed us over the years." She reached into her satchel again and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in silk, was a medal identical to the ones Maria and Klaus carried. "This is the fourth medal," Anna said. "We thought it was lost forever." "But how?" Maria began. "Your grandfather gave it to me during our last operation together," Anna explained. "He said that if anything happened to him, I should hold on to it until his family could be found. He also gave me specific instructions about what to do with it." Anna opened the box further, revealing not just the medal, but also a sealed envelope, with Maria's name written on it in her grandfather's handwriting. "He wrote this letter in 1943 before our final mission. He somehow knew that someday his granddaughter would need to read it." With trembling hands, Maria opened the envelope. The paper was yellowed with age, but her grandfather's words were still clearly legible. "My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this, it means that the truth about my life has finally come to light. I am writing this as I prepare for what may be our most dangerous mission, not knowing if I will survive to tell you these things myself. I want you to know that everything we did, because we believed that every life has value. We could not stand by and watch innocent people suffer when we had the power to help them. The work was dangerous and we lost many good friends. But we also saved many lives, and those lives went on to save others. Good actions create ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. I am giving you this burden, and it is a burden, because I believe you have the strength to carry it. Someday, when the world is ready to hear our story, you will know what to do." The medals are not just symbols. They are keys to a map that shows how ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they work together. Keep them safe, but do not keep them hidden forever. History belongs to everyone. Be brave, Mija. Be kind, and remember that the most important battles are often fought by people whose names will never be famous. With all my love, your grandfather, Miguel. Maria wiped away tears as she finished reading. Around her, the cafe continued its normal business, but at their small table, 3 people sat in profound silence connected across decades by one man's courage and foresight. "What happens now?" Maria finally asked. Thomas smiled. "Now, we complete the work your grandfather started. We make sure that every family touched by our network knows their complete history. We create a permanent record so that future generations will understand what happened here." Anna nodded. "And we show the world that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they're just ordinary people who decide to do the right thing, no matter how difficult or dangerous it might be." Over the next 2 hours, Anna and Thomas shared stories that filled in every gap in Maria's understanding of her grandfather's wartime activities. They showed her photographs of reunions that had taken place over the years, as saved families sought out information about the people who had helped them. They also revealed that they had been in contact with Holocaust museums and historical societies around the world, preparing for this moment when they could finally share their complete records. "Your decision to come forward has given us permission to tell the whole truth," Thomas said. "We've been waiting for Miguel's family to lead the way." As the afternoon drew to a close, Maria realized that her journey was far from over. She was no longer just a sailor carrying a family secret. She had become the keeper of a historical legacy that would impact dozens of institutions and hundreds of families around the world. When she returned to the USS Enterprise the following week, Admiral Hayes was waiting for her with news of his own. "Santos," he said, "the Navy has decided to nominate you for a special commendation. Your courage in bringing this story to light has contributed to one of the most significant historical discoveries of the past decade." But more importantly to Maria, he also had a message from her mother. "Your mom called to tell you that 3 families in San Diego have reached out to her. Apparently, their grandparents were among the people your grandfather saved. They want to meet you and thank you personally for sharing his story." That evening, As Maria stood on the carrier's deck looking out at the vast Pacific Ocean, she felt the weight of her grandfather's medals against her chest. But it was no longer a burden. It was a bridge, connecting her to a past filled with courage and sacrifice, and to a future where that courage would inspire others to stand up for what's right. She thought about Admiral Hayes, who had recognized the importance of her secret and helped her find the courage to share it. She thought about Anna and Thomas, who had carried their own secrets for decades until she gave them permission to speak. And she thought about all the people, past and present, whose lives had been touched by her grandfather's heroism. Miguel Santos had been right when he told her that good actions create ripples. His courage in 1943 had saved hundreds of lives then, and Maria's courage in sharing his story was creating new ripples that would spread far into the future, inspiring others to believe that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things. When they choose to act with courage and compassion, the hidden metal was hidden no more, and the world was better for it.